The telegram slipped from Eleanor Northcott's trembling fingers as the train whistle shrieked its final departure from Piach, Nevada. 6 months pregnant and abandoned at a dusty station in a town she'd never heard of until 3 weeks ago. She watched her last hope disappear in a cloud of black smoke against the vast Nevada sky. James Holloway, her promised husband, was nowhere to be found, and the station master had just informed her that no one by that name even lived in Piach. Eleanor clutched her small carpet bag, the only possession she had besides the clothes on her back and the gold locket around her neck. The September sun beat down mercilessly on the wooden platform. She'd traveled all the way from Boston after exchanging letters for 4 months with a man who had described himself as a successful silver mine owner looking for a respectable wife. Now she realized it had all been an elaborate lie. "Madam," the station master approached cautiously, his weathered face pinched with concern. "Last train east don't come through for another 3 days. You got someplace to stay?" Eleanor straightened her spine, trying to muster whatever dignity remained. "I'm certain there's been some misunderstanding. Perhaps Mr. Holloway was delayed, or perhaps—" "No, madam," the station master said gently. "Been working this station 15 years. Ain't no Holloway in these parts. Never has been." Tears threatened, but Eleanor refused to let them fall. She was 22 years old, unwed and pregnant in a strange town, but she would not collapse. Not yet. "Is there a hotel nearby where I might wait? Perhaps there's been a miscommunication about the location." The station master pointed down the main street where dust devils danced between weather-beaten buildings. "Silver Strike Hotel's down yonder, but it ain't cheap. Mining town prices." He eyed her rounded belly with a mix of pity and judgment. "Might be the church would take you in." Before Eleanor could respond, the sound of spurs jingling against wooden planks drew her attention. A tall man strode onto the platform, his broad shoulders blocking the sun. His face was partially obscured by the brim of a worn leather hat, but she could see he was studying her with intense blue eyes. "Problem here, Frank?" The newcomer's voice was deep, a gentle rumble that somehow cut through the station noise. "This lady was supposed to meet someone, but looks like she's been stood up," the station master explained. The stranger's gaze fell to Eleanor's protruding belly, then back to her face. Instead of the judgment or pity she expected, she saw only thoughtful consideration. "Samuel Garrett," he introduced himself with a slight tip of his hat, "own a ranch about 5 miles outside of town." "Eleanor Northcott," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm afraid I've found myself in an unfortunate situation." Samuel nodded slowly, taking in her city clothes and the quality of her carpet bag. "Mail order bride?" he asked bluntly. Eleanor flushed with shame but lifted her chin. "Yes, but it appears I've been deceived." To her surprise, no mockery crossed his tanned face. "Happens more than folks talk about. Men writing fancy letters to get women out here, then disappearing." He glanced at her belly again. "That his?" "No," Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible. "That's a different matter entirely." Samuel studied her for a long moment. Around them, the station had emptied, the last passengers having found their rides into town or continued their journeys. Only the 3 of them remained, standing in the growing shadow of the empty platform. "I've got a wagon outside," Samuel said finally. "Was just picking up some supplies." He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. "Got a big house. Empty except for me and my housekeeper, Mrs. Wilkins. She's a good woman, getting on in years. Could use some help around the place." Eleanor stared at him in confusion. "Sir, I don't understand what you're suggesting." Samuel removed his hat, revealing thick chestnut hair in need of a trim. "I'm offering you a place to stay, Miss Northcott, no strings attached. You can help Mrs. Wilkins with the household if you're willing, when your time comes." He gestured toward her belly. "Well, Piotr has a decent doctor." "And after?" Eleanor asked cautiously. Samuel replaced his hat, shading his eyes once more. "That's for you to decide, but I'll raise it as mine if you've nowhere else to go." The station master made a choking sound. "Sam, you can't just—" "I can," Samuel interrupted firmly. "My business, Frank." Eleanor's mind raced. She had exactly $3.42 in her purse, not enough for a hotel room, certainly not enough for a ticket back east. Her family had made it clear she was unwelcome after her disgrace. The child's father, a young banker's son who had promised marriage before disappearing to Europe, had abandoned her completely. "Why would you do this?" she asked. "You don't know me." Samuel's weathered face softened slightly. "My ma was in a spot similar to yours once. Someone helped her." He shrugged as if the matter were simple. "That's all." Eleanor took a deep breath. The alternatives begging at the church, seeking work in a town that would judge an unwed mother harshly flashed through her mind. "I accept your offer, Mr. Garrett," she said, her voice steadying. "Temporarily. Until I can make other arrangements." Samuel nodded once, then picked up her carpetbag. "Wagon's this way. Hope you don't mind a bumpy ride." As she followed him from the platform, Eleanor felt the weight of the station master's stare. She knew what he and others would think, that she was simply trading one arrangement for another, seeking a man's protection at any cost. But desperation had narrowed her choices to near nothing. The wagon was sturdy but weathered, hitched to two solid draft horses. Samuel helped her climb onto the wooden seat, his strong hands respectful as they steadied her. The touch was brief but reassuring. Once seated beside her, he clicked his tongue, and the horses began their steady plod away from the station. "Ranch is called Sweetwater," he explained as they left the town behind. "Named for the natural spring on the property. It's not fancy, but it's peaceful, good place to." His eyes flickered to her belly, to think about what comes next. Eleanor nodded, watching the rugged landscape unfold around them. The Nevada desert was nothing like Boston, harsh, expansive, and somehow beautiful in its severity. Much like the man beside her, she thought. "I should tell you," she said after they had ridden in silence for some time. "I'm not what you might call experienced in household matters. I was raised with servants." Samuel's mouth quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Mrs. Wilkins will teach you what you need to know. She likes to boss folks around anyway." Another mile passed in silence before Eleanor gathered the courage to ask the question pressing on her mind. "Mr. Garrett, are you married?" "No, madam." "Have you ever been?" His hands tightened slightly on the reins. "Once. She died. Fever 5 years back." "I'm sorry," Eleanor said softly. Samuel nodded but offered nothing more. As the wagon crested a small rise, he pointed ahead. "That's Sweetwater." Eleanor gasped softly. Below them stretched a surprisingly green valley with a creek cutting through its center. The ranch house was larger than she had expected, a 2-story structure of solid timber with a wide porch wrapping around it. Several outbuildings clustered nearby, and in the distance, she could see cattle grazing in fenced pastures. "It's lovely," she said honestly. "It's home," Samuel replied, a note of pride in his voice. He guided the horses down the slope toward the house. "Been in my family 20 years. My pa came out from Kentucky after the war, built it up from nothing." As they approached, an older woman emerged onto the porch, wiping her hands on an apron. Her gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, but her round face looked kind if surprised at the sight of the passenger beside Samuel. "Mrs. Wilkins," Samuel called as he drew the wagon to a stop. "We have a guest who will be staying with us for a while. Miss Eleanor Northcott." The housekeeper's eyes widened as she took in Eleanor's condition, but she recovered quickly. "Well, don't just sit there gawking, Samuel. Help the poor girl down and bring her inside. She looks ready to faint from the heat." Eleanor found herself whisked from the wagon and into the surprisingly cool interior of the ranch house. The furnishings were simple but solid. A large wooden table dominated the kitchen, while comfortable-looking chairs surrounded a stone fireplace in the adjacent room. "Samuel Garrett, what on earth?" Mrs. Wilkins hissed once Eleanor was seated with a glass of cool water. "She needed help," Samuel said simply. "Nowhere to go, I offered her a place here." "And the child?" Mrs. Wilkins glanced meaningfully at Eleanor's belly. "Is her business," Samuel said firmly. "But I told her we'd help, that I'd claim it if need be, Mrs." Wilkins' mouth fell open, then snapped shut. She shook her head, muttering something that sounded like, "just like your father," before turning to Eleanor with a softer expression. "Well, Miss Northcott, you must be exhausted. Let me show you to a room where you can rest. We can sort everything else out later." Eleanor followed the older woman up a wooden staircase to a simple but clean bedroom. A large bed with a handmade quilt dominated the space, and through the window, she could see the sun beginning its descent toward the western mountains. "Thank you," Eleanor said, suddenly overwhelmed by the kindness of these strangers. "I don't know how I'll ever repay—" "Hush now," Mrs. Wilkins patted her arm. "Samuel's a good judge of character, always has been. If he brought you home, there must be something worth saving." Left alone, Eleanor sank onto the bed, one hand resting on her swollen belly. For the first time since watching the train disappear, she allowed herself to weep not from despair, but from the sheer relief of finding shelter in this vast, unfamiliar land. Eleanor awoke to golden light streaming through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment, confusion gripped her, but then the events of the previous day came rushing back. She was at Sweetwater Ranch, taken in by a stranger with kind eyes and a quiet voice. A soft knock at the door preceded Mrs. Wilkins' entrance. The housekeeper carried a basin of steaming water and a bundle of clothing. "Thought you might want to freshen up," the older woman said. "Found some things that might fit you. Belonged to Samuel's sister before she moved to California. Nothing fancy, but practical for ranch life." "Thank you," Eleanor said, climbing carefully from the bed. "What time is it?" "Just past 7. Samuel's been up since 5, tending to the cattle. Breakfast is ready whenever you are." Mrs. Wilkins hesitated. "How are you feeling this morning? The baby giving you trouble?" Eleanor placed a hand on her belly. "No more than usual. I'm due in about 3 months, the doctor in Boston said." Mrs. Wilkins nodded approvingly. "Good timing. Winter's harsh, but you'll have the baby before the worst hits. Now get yourself dressed and come down when you're ready." Once alone, Eleanor quickly washed and changed into the offered clothing, a simple blue cotton dress with enough room to accommodate her growing belly. The fabric was worn but clean, and the style was practical for the demanding life she imagined ranch women led. Downstairs, she found Mrs. Wilkins bustling around the kitchen, frying bacon and flipping biscuits. The smells made Eleanor's stomach growl audibly, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since a meager lunch on the train the day before. "Sit, sit," Mrs. Wilkins directed, pointing to the table. "Can't have you wasting away." "That baby needs feeding too." Eleanor obeyed, accepting a plate laden with eggs, bacon, and biscuits dripping with honey. "This is too much," she protested weakly. "Nonsense. Ranch work requires hearty meals." Mrs. Wilkins poured her a cup of steaming coffee. "Samuel will be in shortly. Always comes back for second breakfast, that man." As if summoned, the door swung open and Samuel entered, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. His face was flushed from exertion, and dust clung to his clothes, but he nodded a greeting to Eleanor before washing his hands at the basin by the door. "Sleep well?" he asked, taking a seat across from her. "Yes, thank you," Eleanor replied, suddenly shy in the bright light of morning. Her situation seemed even more precarious by daylight, a pregnant, unmarried woman sharing quarters with a bachelor rancher. What would people think? As if reading her thoughts, Samuel spoke between bites of breakfast. "Been thinking. Town's full of gossips. Need a story to tell." Eleanor tensed. "What kind of story?" "Simple one. You're my late wife's cousin, come to help after your husband died. Baby's his. You'll stay on his family." Mrs. Wilkins nodded approvingly. "That'll work. Nobody around here knew Caroline's people. They were from back east somewhere." "Caroline was your wife?" Eleanor asked softly. Samuel nodded once, his expression unchanged. "Folks'll be curious but respectful if they think you're a widow. Save you some trouble." Eleanor considered the offer. A false identity felt wrong, but the protection it would provide was undeniable. "I appreciate the thought, but I don't want to begin with lies." Samuel shrugged. "Your choice. Just offering a way to make things easier." "What I don't understand," Eleanor said carefully, "is why you're doing all this. Taking in a stranger, offering to claim her child." "It's extraordinary, Mr. Garrett." Samuel finished his coffee before answering. "Told you yesterday. Someone helped my ma once." "Your mother was in a similar situation?" Eleanor asked. Mrs. Wilkins snorted softly. "Similar enough. Sam's pa wasn't his blood father." Samuel shot the housekeeper a warning look, but she merely shrugged. "Girl deserves to know why you're so set on helping her, Samuel." Sighing, Samuel leaned back in his chair. "My mother was unmarried when she had me. Man who fathered me was already married, turned out. Thomas Garrett was passing through her town, saw her situation, married her and gave me his name, raised me as his own." "That's remarkable," Eleanor said softly. "Wasn't back then," Samuel replied. "Just a decent thing to do." He pushed away from the table. "Got work to finish. Mrs. Wilkins will show you around, tell you what needs doing in the house. Don't overdo it in your condition." With that, he replaced his hat and was gone, leaving Eleanor to absorb what she'd learned about the man who had offered her sanctuary. "Don't mind him," Mrs. Wilkins said, clearing the dishes. "Man of few words, always has been, but his heart's good." "I can see that," Eleanor said, "though I still find it hard to believe someone would be so generous to a complete stranger." Mrs. Wilkins wiped her hands on her apron. "Samuel's seen plenty of hardship, knows what it means to need help." She gestured around the kitchen. "Now then, if you're staying, might as well make yourself useful. Can you bake?" Eleanor smiled weakly. "I'm afraid not. My mother considered cooking beneath our station." "Well, never too late to learn," the housekeeper said briskly. "We'll start simple. Bread's a good beginning. Ranch hands work up powerful appetites." "Ranch hands," Eleanor's eyes widened. "There are others here. Just 3, Hank, Miguel, and Charlie. They bunk in the outbuilding. Good men, all of them. They only come to the main house for Sunday supper, so you needn't worry about them." For the remainder of the morning, Eleanor found herself engrossed in learning the basics of bread making. The rhythmic kneading of dough proved surprisingly satisfying, and Mrs. Wilkins was a patient teacher. By noon, the first loaves were cooling on the windowsill, their yeasty aroma filling the kitchen. "Not bad for a first attempt," Mrs. Wilkins declared. "You've got good hands for it." Eleanor felt a small surge of pride. "Thank you. It feels good to create something useful." "That's the thing about ranch life," Mrs. Wilkins said. "Everything you do matters. No frippery or waste." She glanced at Eleanor's belly. "Speaking of which, we'll need to prepare for that little one. I've still got the cradle Samuel used as a baby up in the attic. And we should start sewing some gowns." The matter-of-fact way Mrs. Wilkins spoke of the baby made Eleanor's throat tighten with emotion. In Boston, Her pregnancy had been treated as a shameful secret, something to be hidden away. Here, it was simply accepted as part of life's natural progression. "I don't know how to sew either," Eleanor admitted. "But I'd like to learn." Mrs. Wilkins chuckled. "What did they teach you back east? How to pour tea properly, how to play the pianoforte, how to engage in meaningless conversation with suitable young men." Eleanor's tone was more bitter than she intended. "Nothing of any real use, it seems." "Well, you're young yet, plenty of time to learn what matters." Mrs. Wilkins reached for her sewing basket. "We'll start with simple stitches this afternoon after you've rested." As the days passed, Eleanor fell into the rhythm of ranch life. Each morning, she rose early to help Mrs. Wilkins prepare breakfast. Samuel would come in briefly to eat, before returning to his work with the cattle or mending fences. He rarely spoke beyond necessary communication, but his quiet presence was somehow reassuring. Eleanor's first trip to town came 2 weeks after her arrival. Samuel needed supplies, and Mrs. Wilkins insisted she should accompany him to purchase fabric for baby clothes. "People will talk less if they see you out in the open," the housekeeper reasoned. "Hiding away just feeds speculation." The prospect of facing the townspeople filled Eleanor with dread, but she recognized the wisdom in Mrs. Wilkins' words. She donned her best dress, one of the few that still accommodated her growing belly, and climbed into the wagon beside Samuel. "Ready?" he asked, studying her face. "As I'll ever be," she replied, attempting a smile. The ride to town was mostly silent, but it was a comfortable silence. Eleanor found herself admiring the landscape, the rugged mountains in the distance, the scattered juniper trees, the occasional burst of wildflowers defying the harsh terrain. It was nothing like the manicured gardens and crowded streets of Boston, but it held its own wild beauty. Piotch was bustling when they arrived, the streets filled with miners, cowboys, and townspeople going about their business. Eleanor felt eyes upon her as Samuel helped her down from the wagon, but she held her head high, remembering her mother's lessons in deportment if not in useful skills. "General store first," Samuel said, offering his arm to steady her. "Then we'll see Doc Williams about arranging for your confinement." Eleanor nodded, grateful for his practical approach. As they moved through town, she was aware of curious glances and whispered conversations, but Samuel's solid presence beside her seemed to deter any direct questioning. In the general store, the proprietor greeted Samuel warmly. "Mr. Garrett, good to see you. The usual supplies today?" "Yes, plus whatever the lady needs," Samuel replied, gesturing to Eleanor. "Miss Northcott is staying at Sweetwater for a time." The storekeeper's eyes flickered to Eleanor's condition, but his smile remained pleasant. "Welcome to Piotch, Miss Northcott. Anything particular you're looking for?" "Fabric for baby things," she said, surprised at how steady her voice sounded. "And perhaps some yarn if you have it." As Eleanor selected calico and soft flannel, she overheard fragments of whispered conversation from 2 women examining bolts of cloth nearby. "Living at Sweetwater with that Garrett man. Condition is obvious and no ring. Always kept to himself after Caroline died." Eleanor's cheeks burned, but she continued her shopping with determined dignity. When they approached the counter to pay, Samuel placed a protective hand at the small of her back, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the gossiping women. Outside, Eleanor released a shaky breath. "I don't think I made a very good impression." Samuel loaded her purchases into the wagon. "Don't concern yourself with their opinions. Most folks around here have their own secrets to hide." Their next stop was the doctor's office. Dr. Williams was a surprisingly young man with kind eyes and capable hands. He examined Eleanor thoroughly, pronouncing both her and the baby in good health. "Another 12 weeks, I'd say," he concluded. "The baby's positioned well, Have you experienced childbirth before, Miss Northcott, Eleanor corrected quietly. And no, this is my first. If the doctor was surprised by her unmarried state, he hid it well. I see. Well, you appear healthy and the baby seems strong. I'd like to see you monthly until your time comes. Send for me when labor begins. I'll come to the ranch. Thank you, doctor, Samuel said, settling the bill. We appreciate your discretion. Dr. Williams nodded, understanding. Medical matters are private, Mr. Garrett. Always have been in my practice. As they left the doctor's office, Eleanor felt lighter somehow. The baby was healthy, and at least one person in town had treated her with respect rather than judgment. Their final stop was the post office, where Samuel checked for mail. To Eleanor's surprise, he emerged with a letter addressed to her. "How is that possible?" she asked, staring at the envelope bearing her name. "No one knows I'm here." "Put a notice in the Sacramento and San Francisco papers," Samuel explained. "Said any correspondence for Eleanor Northcott could be forwarded here. Thought family might be looking for you." Eleanor was touched by his thoughtfulness. "Thank you. Though I doubt my family is concerned with my whereabouts." The letter, she discovered as they drove back to the ranch, was from her younger sister, Amelia. It was brief but heartfelt, expressing worry about Eleanor's sudden departure from Boston and providing an address where she could be reached, not their parents' home, but that of a friend where Amelia was apparently staying. "Good news?" Samuel asked, noticing her small smile. "My sister," Eleanor explained. "She's worried about me. We were close before. Everything," she hesitated. "Would it be possible for me to send a reply?" "Of course," Samuel said. "We'll post it next time we're in town." That evening after dinner, Eleanor sat at the kitchen table composing her letter. She told Amelia about Sweetwater Ranch, about Mrs. Wilkins' kindness, and Samuel's generosity. She explained her situation honestly, but emphasized that she was safe and the baby was healthy. What she didn't write was how increasingly at home she felt on the ranch, or how her eyes sometimes followed Samuel as he worked around the property, admiring his quiet strength and unwavering principles. Finishing up, Samuel's voice startled her. He had entered quietly, a book in his hand. "Almost," Eleanor replied, setting down her pen. "I was just telling my sister about Sweetwater. It's a special place." Samuel nodded, taking a seat across from her. "Been thinking, winter's coming. Baby will be here before Christmas. We should discuss arrangements. Eleanor repeated. "For after," Samuel said simply. "You planning to stay? Or move on once you're recovered?" The question caught Eleanor off guard. She'd been so focused on the immediate challenges, learning ranch skills, preparing for the baby, that she hadn't thought much beyond the birth. I don't know," she admitted. "I have nowhere else to go, but I can't impose on your kindness indefinitely." Samuel opened his book, a collection of Thoreau's essays. She noted with surprise and marked his place carefully before responding. "Not an imposition. Place is big enough. Mrs. Wilkins likes having you here. Says you've got a knack for baking now." Eleanor smiled faintly. "She's very generous with her praise, but surely you didn't envision a permanent arrangement when you offered me help." Samuel's blue eyes met hers directly. "Didn't think that far ahead. Just saw someone in need." He paused. "But now that you've been here a while, seems like you fit. You and the baby would be welcome to stay, permanently." "As what?" Eleanor asked, her heart suddenly racing. "Your housekeeper, a charity case, as family," Samuel said quietly, "if you want it." Before Eleanor could respond, a sharp pain lanced through her abdomen. She gasped, clutching the edge of the table. Samuel was on his feet instantly. "What is it?" "I don't know," Eleanor managed, breathing through the pain. "It's too early for the baby," but another wave hit her, stronger this time. "Mrs. Wilkins," Samuel shouted, moving to Eleanor's side. "Something's wrong with Miss Northcott." The housekeeper appeared in the doorway, took one look at Eleanor's contorted face, and sprang into action. "Get her to bed, Samuel. Then ride for the doctor. Might be false labor, but we can't take chances." Samuel gathered Eleanor into his arms as if she weighed nothing, carrying her swiftly up the stairs to her bedroom. The tenderness with which he laid her on the bed belied his strength. "Hold on," he said, his voice rough with concern. "I'll get the doctor. Mrs. Wilkins will stay with you." Eleanor nodded weakly, another pain washing through her. As Samuel disappeared, Mrs. Wilkins began methodically preparing the room, gathering clean linens and placing a basin of water nearby. "Deep breaths, child," the older woman instructed. "Let's see what's happening before we panic." The pains continued, irregular but intense, as they waited for the doctor. Mrs. Wilkins kept a cool cloth on Eleanor's forehead, murmuring encouragement and checking periodically for signs that the baby was truly coming. "No bleeding, that's good," she said after one examination. "And the pains aren't getting closer together. Might just be your body practicing." Eleanor clung to this hope as the hours crept by. Finally, near midnight, they heard horses in the yard. Minutes later, Dr. Williams hurried into the room, medical bag in hand, with Samuel close behind him. "Let me see," the doctor said, gently but efficiently examining Eleanor. After several tense minutes, his expression relaxed. "False labor, as I suspected. The baby's not coming yet, but your body is preparing." Eleanor nearly wept with relief. "The baby's all right, seems to be," Dr. Williams confirmed, "but you need complete rest for at least a week. No housework, no exertion of any kind. The risk of early labor is real." Samuel, who had been standing silently by the door, stepped forward. "She'll rest. I'll make sure of it." The doctor nodded approvingly. "Good. I'll come back in 3 days to check on her progress." He prepared a mild sedative and helped Eleanor drink it. "This will help you sleep tonight. The pains should subside gradually." As the medicine began to take effect, Eleanor was dimly aware of the doctor leaving and Mrs. Wilkins arranging blankets around her. The last thing she remembered before drifting off was the sensation of a large, warm hand briefly covering hers and Samuel's voice, low and determined. "You'll be all right, both of you." Eleanor's week of enforced rest passed slowly. Mrs. Wilkins brought meals to her room and helped her with necessary movements, but otherwise she was confined to bed, with only books and her sewing for distraction. Each day, Samuel would stop by briefly in the morning and evening to check on her, his visits brief but attentive. On the third day, Dr. Williams returned as promised and declared Eleanor improved but still in need of caution. "Another 4 days of rest," he prescribed. "Then you can resume light activities, emphasis on light." By the end of the week, Eleanor was desperate to leave her room. When Mrs. Wilkins finally helped her downstairs for breakfast, she nearly cried at the simple pleasure of sitting at the kitchen table again. Samuel was there, unusual for mid-morning. "Doctor says you can move around a bit now," he said, studying her face carefully. "How do you feel?" "Much better," Eleanor assured him, "and thoroughly tired of that bedroom." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Thought you might be. Figured you could use some fresh air. It's warm today, Indian summer. Thought you might like to sit on the porch a while." The thoughtfulness of the suggestion touched Eleanor deeply. "I'd like that very much." After breakfast, Samuel helped her to a comfortable rocking chair on the wide front porch. The October sun was indeed warm, and the view of the ranch spread before her like a painting, golden grasses rippling in the breeze, cattle grazing in the distance, the mountains rising majestically beyond. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Samuel said, leaning against the porch rail. "It's magnificent," Eleanor agreed. "So different from Boston, but wonderful in its own way." Samuel nodded, seemingly pleased by her appreciation. Been thinking while you were laid up about what happens after the baby comes. Eleanor's pulse quickened. Their conversation had been interrupted the night of her false labor, but she had thought often of his words. As family, if you want it. What have you been thinking? She asked carefully. Samuel removed his hat, running a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort with difficult conversations. Thought maybe we could marry, he said simply. Give the baby a name, give you protection. Eleanor's breath caught. Mr. Garrett, Samuel, he corrected. If we're discussing marriage, seems right you should use my given name. Samuel, she amended, the name feeling strange and intimate on her tongue. Are you proposing marriage out of pity, because you feel obligated to protect me? His blue eyes held her steadily. Not pity, respect. You've shown courage coming all this way alone, resilience, learning ranch skills when you were raised for parlors, and kindness to Mrs. Wilkins to the hands when they come for Sunday supper. He paused. I like the way you fit here. Like who you are becoming away from the city. But marriage, Eleanor persisted, that's a lifelong commitment. We barely know each other. Samuel's expression softened slightly. My parents knew each other 3 days when they married. 40 years they had together, good and bad. Sometimes you just know when something's right. And you think this is right? Eleanor asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Think it could be, Samuel replied. For the baby, for the ranch, for us maybe in time. Eleanor studied his face, the strong lines, the earnest eyes, the quiet dignity that seemed to radiate from him. In the weeks since her arrival, she had come to admire this man and his unwavering moral compass. Was that enough to build a marriage upon? I would want. She hesitated, searching for the right words. I would want more than a marriage of convenience eventually. I would want a true partnership, perhaps even love in time. Samuel nodded slowly. Wouldn't expect less. Can't promise love right away, but can promise respect, fidelity. Protection for you and the child. A slight smile touched his lips. And patience while you learn to make biscuits that don't break teeth. The small joke, rare from the serious rancher, startled a laugh from Eleanor. My biscuits have improved considerably, I'll have you know. They have, he agreed, his eyes warming. So, what do you say? Eleanor took a deep breath. The proposal was unconventional, practical rather than romantic, but there was something honest about it that appealed to her. Samuel Garrett was offering her and her child a home, a name, a future, and the possibility of something more developing between them. Yes, she said finally. I accept your proposal, Samuel, though I think we should wait until after the baby comes for the actual ceremony. I'd prefer not to waddle down the aisle. His smile broadened, transforming his face. Spring wedding, then. February, maybe, once you've recovered. Eleanor nodded, a strange mix of emotions swirling within her: relief, gratitude, and something that felt surprisingly like happiness. February would be perfect. The weeks that followed were busy ones at Sweetwater Ranch. As November arrived with its shorter days and cooler temperatures, preparations for winter occupied everyone's time. Eleanor, now allowed to resume light duties, helped Mrs. Wilkins preserve the last of the garden's produce and prepare the house for the coming cold. Samuel spent long days with the ranch hands, ensuring the cattle were moved to protected pastures, and that sufficient hay was stored for the winter months. Each evening, however, he made time to sit with Eleanor after dinner, sometimes reading while she sewed baby clothes, sometimes discussing the day's events or plans for the ranch's future. Slowly, a different kind of relationship began to develop between them. Samuel was still a man of few words, but Eleanor learned to read his expressions, to understand the meanings behind his brief statements. He, in turn, seemed to appreciate her more talkative nature, occasionally smiling at her observations or asking questions that revealed his interest in her thoughts. "Never understood why women put such store in fancy clothes," he commented one evening as Eleanor worked on a particularly intricate baby gown. "It's not about the fanciness," she explained, fingers moving deftly with her newly acquired sewing skills. "It's about creating something beautiful. Life can be harsh, especially out here. Beauty matters all the more because of that." Samuel considered this, then nodded. "Makes sense. Like wildflowers after a drought, more precious for being rare." "Exactly," Eleanor said, pleased by his understanding. As her pregnancy advanced, Eleanor found Samuel becoming increasingly attentive. He built a cradle for the baby, crafted from pine with careful, smooth joints. When snow began to fall in early December, he insisted on accompanying her for even the short walk to the henhouse, concerned she might slip on the icy ground. The ranch hands, who now took their Sunday meals in the main house regularly, treated her with a mixture of shy respect and protective care that Eleanor found touching. Hank, the oldest, brought her a rocking horse he'd carved in his spare time. Miguel's wife sent over a beautiful crocheted blanket, and young Charlie always made a point of carrying in extra firewood whenever he visited, ensuring the house stayed warm. "They've accepted you," Mrs. Wilkins observed one Sunday after the men had departed. "That's not a small thing." Ranch hands can be particular about who they respect. "They're good men," Eleanor said. "I'm grateful for their kindness." Mrs. Wilkins nodded approvingly. "They know Samuel's choice is a good one. Man's never made a foolish decision in his life, except maybe that time he tried to ride that wild Mustang when he was 18. She chuckled at the memory. "Broke his arm in 2 places. "I can't imagine Samuel doing anything reckless," Eleanor said, surprised. "Oh, he had his moments as a young man," Mrs. Wilkins assured her. "Caroline settled him some. Her death settled him more, and not in a good way. Too serious these past 5 years." She gave Eleanor a meaningful look. "Until recently." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. "I don't think I've changed him." "Maybe not," the housekeeper allowed. "But you've given him something to look forward to. Both of you have." She nodded toward Eleanor's prominent belly. "That's no small gift." As Christmas approached, Eleanor found herself experiencing a surprising contentment. Her previous life in Boston seemed distant now, like something that had happened to another person. Here at Sweetwater, despite her unusual circumstances, she felt more at home than she ever had in her parents' grand house. The holiday itself was a simple but warm affair. Mrs. Wilkins prepared a feast: roast goose, potatoes, fresh bread, and pies, and the ranch hands joined them in the main house. Samuel presented Eleanor with a gift, a beautiful silver brush and mirror set that had belonged to his mother. "Thought you might like something pretty," he said quietly as she unwrapped it. "No things have been practical around here." "It's beautiful," Eleanor said, genuinely touched by the thoughtful gesture. She had made him a new scarf, the wool carefully knitted in evenings by the fire. It wasn't much, but the pleased expression on his face when he unwrapped it suggested he valued the gift. That night, after everyone had gone and the house was quiet, Samuel lingered in the parlor where Eleanor sat enjoying the decorated pine tree they had cut from the property. "Good Christmas?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her. "The best I can remember," she answered honestly. "There's something special about celebrating simply with people who genuinely care for each other." Samuel nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Caroline always loved Christmas. Used to decorate every corner of the house." He rarely spoke of his late wife, and Eleanor listened attentively. "Been a while since the house felt this. Alive." "Thank you for sharing it with me," Eleanor said softly, "for sharing all of this." In the firelight, His eyes seemed to darken as they studied her face. "No thanks needed. You've brought something back to Sweetwater that was missing." He hesitated, then reached over and gently covered her hand with his. "Something I was missing." The touch was simple, but it sent a tremor through Eleanor that had nothing to do with her pregnancy. For the first time, she saw something in Samuel's gaze that went beyond kindness or respect, something that looked remarkably like the beginnings of love. The moment was broken by a sharp kick from the baby that made Eleanor gasp and place her free hand on her belly. Samuel's eyes widened. "Was that?" Eleanor nodded, smiling. "Someone's very active tonight. Here." Acting on impulse, she took his large hand and placed it on the spot where the baby was kicking. Samuel remained perfectly still, his palm warm against her through the fabric of her dress. When the baby kicked again, his face transformed with wonder. "Strong," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes," Eleanor agreed. "Dr. Williams says that's a good sign." Samuel didn't immediately remove his hand, and Eleanor didn't ask him to. They sat in comfortable silence, connected by the movements of the child who would soon join their unusual family. The new year arrived with a ferocious snowstorm that kept everyone confined to the house for 3 days. By January 10th, Eleanor's due date was fast approaching, and she found herself increasingly uncomfortable and anxious. "First babies often come late," Mrs. Wilkins reassured her. "Could be another week or two." But in the early hours of January 15th, Eleanor awoke to a different kind of pain than the false labor she had experienced months before. This was stronger, more purposeful, and accompanied by a rush of fluid that left no doubt her time had come. Mrs. Wilkins, responding to Eleanor's call, confirmed it immediately. "I'll wake Samuel to fetch the doctor. You try to rest between pains, this could take a while." The day that followed was the most challenging of Eleanor's life. Her labor progressed slowly but steadily, the pains building in intensity as the hours passed. Dr. Williams arrived mid-morning, his calm presence reassuring as he checked her progress. "Everything's proceeding normally," he assured her. "The baby's positioned well, just need patience now." Samuel stayed close to the house all day, though propriety kept him from the birthing room. Mrs. Wilkins reported that he was wearing a path in the kitchen floor with his pacing. "Never seen him so nervous," she told Eleanor during a brief respite between contractions. "Keeps asking if there's anything he can do." As afternoon turned to evening, Eleanor's labor intensified. The pains came faster, stronger, until she felt certain she couldn't endure another. Yet somehow, with Mrs. Wilkins on one side and Dr. Williams directing her efforts, she found strength she didn't know she possessed. "I can see the head," the doctor announced. "One more good push, Miss Northcott." With a final, tremendous effort, Eleanor felt the baby slip from her body, and a moment later, a lusty cry filled the room. "A boy," Dr. Williams announced, quickly cleaning and wrapping the infant. "A fine, healthy boy." Tears streamed down Eleanor's face as the doctor placed the tiny bundle in her arms. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and when he briefly opened them, eyes of deepest blue. He was perfect, small but sturdy, with tiny fists that punched at the air as if announcing his arrival to the world. "Would you like Mr. Garrett to come in?" Mrs. Wilkins asked after the doctor had tended to Eleanor and declared both mother and child doing well. Eleanor nodded, suddenly eager for Samuel to see his future stepson. Mrs. Wilkins disappeared, and moments later Samuel entered the room, his face a mixture of concern and anticipation. "Eleanor," he asked, approaching the bed cautiously. "We're both well," she assured him, shifting the blanket to reveal the baby's face. "Come meet him." Samuel moved closer, his expression softening as he gazed at the infant. "He's perfect," he said simply. "Would you like to hold him?" Eleanor offered. Samuel hesitated, then carefully took the swaddled baby into his large hands. The contrast between his weathered strength and the infant's delicate features was striking, yet he held the child with natural confidence. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "Welcome to Sweetwater." Watching him cradle her son with such tenderness, Eleanor felt something inside her shift and settle. This man, this kind, honorable man who had taken in a desperate stranger and offered her child his name, was showing her yet again the depth of his character. "I've been thinking about names," Eleanor said. "If you agree, I'd like to call him Thomas after your father, the man who raised you as his own." Samuel's head jerked up, his eyes meeting hers with startled intensity. "You do that. It seems fitting," Eleanor said simply. "Thomas Samuel Garrett." For a moment, Samuel seemed unable to speak. Then, still cradling the baby, he moved to sit carefully on the edge of the bed beside Eleanor. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Pa would have been honored." As they sat together, the three of them forming an unlikely but somehow perfect family tableau, Eleanor felt a certainty settle over her. Whatever had brought her to this moment, the scandal in Boston, the deception that had stranded her in Piotch, the kindness of the man beside her, had led her exactly where she was meant to be. The February wedding was a small affair, held in Piotch's modest church, with only a handful of witnesses: Mrs. Wilkins, the ranch hands, Dr. Williams and his wife, and a few townspeople who had overcome their initial judgment to accept Eleanor as Samuel's chosen bride. Baby Thomas, now a month old and growing rapidly, slept peacefully in Mrs. Wilkins' arms throughout the short ceremony. Eleanor wore a simple dress of pale blue, sewn by her own hands under Mrs. Wilkins' guidance. Samuel, unrecognizable in his Sunday best with his hair freshly trimmed, watched her walk down the aisle with an expression of such quiet joy that Eleanor felt her heart might burst. The vows were traditional, but Eleanor heard in them a deeper meaning than she had ever anticipated. For better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, these weren't just words but promises they had already begun to fulfill. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel's kiss was gentle but firm, a seal on their unusual covenant. As they turned to face the small congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Garrett, Eleanor saw something in the faces around them that she had never expected: approval, even happiness for their union. The celebration afterward was held at Sweetwater, with tables set up in the main room and food prepared by Mrs. Wilkins and the wives of the ranch hands. There was music. Miguel played the guitar while his oldest son accompanied him on the fiddle, and even dancing, with Samuel surprising everyone by leading Eleanor in a somewhat stiff but sincere waltz. "Never much cared for dancing," he admitted quietly as they moved around the cleared space, "but figured a bride should have at least one dance at her wedding." "Thank you," Eleanor said, smiling up at him, "for this, for everything." As the party wound down and guests departed, wishing them well, Eleanor found herself experiencing a moment of sudden shyness. Tonight would be the first time she and Samuel would share a room as husband and wife. They had discussed the matter frankly in the weeks leading up to the wedding. Samuel had insisted that their marriage would be real in every sense, but only when Eleanor was fully recovered and ready. "No rush," he had told her. "Some things are worth waiting for." That night, after checking on Thomas one final time in the nursery that had once been a small sewing room, Eleanor entered the master bedroom, now their bedroom, with a flutter of anticipation. Samuel was already there, standing by the window in his nightshirt, looking out at the starlit landscape. "Beautiful night," he said as she closed the door behind her. "Yes," Eleanor agreed, moving to stand beside him. The moon cast silver light across the snow-covered ranch, making it look almost magical in its pristine beauty. "Happy?" Samuel asked, turning to study her face. "Very," she answered honestly. "Happier than I ever expected to be again after everything that happened in Boston." Samuel nodded thoughtfully. "Life has a way of taking unexpected turns. 6 months ago I was alone, thinking I'd stay that way. Now—" He gestured toward the nursery where their son slept. "Now everything's different. Do you regret it?" Eleanor asked, suddenly needing to know. "Stopping at the train station that day. Taking in a pregnant stranger." Samuel reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture of such casual intimacy that Eleanor felt her breath catch. "Not for a single moment," he said. "Best decision I ever made, next to marrying you today." "Samuel," Eleanor whispered, moved beyond words by the sincerity in his voice. He drew her closer, one hand coming to rest at the small of her back. "Been wanting to tell you something," he said, his voice low. "Been feeling it for weeks now, but wanted to be sure before I said it." Eleanor looked up at him questioningly. "I love you," he said simply. "Not just for Thomas's sake, not just because you're my wife. I love who you are, Eleanor Garrett." The declaration, delivered in Samuel's characteristically straightforward manner, filled Eleanor with joy so intense it brought tears to her eyes. "I love you too," she replied, the words feeling both momentous and completely natural. "I think I began to fall in love with you that first day, when you offered to raise a stranger's child as your own." Samuel's arms tightened around her, and when he kissed her, it was with none of the restraint he had shown at the church. This was a husband's kiss, tender yet passionate, promising and claiming all at once. Later, as they lay together in the large bed that no longer seemed too big for one person, Eleanor rested her head on Samuel's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I'm thinking about how close I came to missing this," she admitted. "If James Holloway had been real, if he had met me at the station as promised, I would have married him, never knowing what I could have had with you." Samuel was quiet for a moment. "Maybe some things are meant to be, no matter how they start. My ma used to say that God works in strange ways sometimes, but always toward good for those who trust him." "I think she was right," Eleanor murmured sleepily. "Everything that seemed like disaster led me here, to you and Thomas and Sweetwater." Samuel pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Sleep now, wife. Tomorrow's another day on the ranch, first of many." 2 years later, Eleanor stood on the front porch of Sweetwater Ranch, watching as Samuel chased a laughing Thomas across the yard. At just past 2 years old, their son was a sturdy, energetic child with his mother's smile and his father's determined nature. "Papa, up!" Thomas demanded, raising his arms to Samuel, who swung him high into the air, eliciting more delighted giggles. Eleanor rested one hand on her swollen belly, feeling the gentle movements of the new life within. This pregnancy had been so different from her first, surrounded by love and anticipation rather than shame and fear. "Don't tire him out completely," she called. "We still need to visit town this afternoon." Samuel carried Thomas back to the porch, the boy perched securely on his shoulders. "Yes, madam," he replied with the hint of a smile that was now a familiar sight. "Though I think he's got enough energy to run all the way to Piotch and back." "Like his father," Eleanor teased, accepting the quick kiss Samuel offered as he set Thomas down. "Mama play?" Thomas asked, tugging at her skirt. "Mama needs to rest a bit before we go to town," Samuel explained, crouching to his son's level. "Remember, the baby in Mama's tummy makes her tired sometimes." Thomas nodded solemnly, placing a small hand on Eleanor's belly. "Baby sister." "Or brother," Eleanor reminded him. "We won't know until the baby arrives." "Soon?" Thomas asked hopefully. "A few more weeks," Eleanor told him. "Dr. Williams says early October." The mention of the doctor reminded Eleanor of the letter that had arrived that morning, news from Boston that had both surprised and moved her. Amelia's letter mentioned that Dr. Peterson is thinking of relocating to Nevada, she told Samuel. Apparently, Boston has too many doctors, and he's heard there's need out west. Piotr could use another good doctor, Samuel agreed. Williams is getting older, covers too much territory by himself. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. It would be nice to have Amelia nearby. I think she'd like it here. In the 2 years since their marriage, Eleanor had maintained regular correspondence with her sister, the only member of her Boston family who had stood by her. Their parents remained estranged, unwilling to acknowledge the grandchild born under such shameful circumstances, despite Eleanor's now respectable marriage. Invite them, Samuel suggested. Tell him the opportunities. Town's growing. Silver mines are producing well. Good time to start fresh. Eleanor smiled, once again touched by her husband's generous spirit. I'll write to her tonight. Later that afternoon, the family rode into Piotr for supplies and to mail Eleanor's letter. The town had indeed grown since her arrival 3 years earlier. New buildings lined the main street, and the population had nearly doubled with the success of the mines. At the general store, they were greeted warmly by the proprietor and other customers. Eleanor, once the subject of whispered speculation, was now respected as Mrs. Garrett, wife of one of the area's most successful ranchers. Thomas, with his winning smile and friendly nature, was a favorite among the townspeople. Mrs. Garrett, you're looking well, Mrs. Peterson, the banker's wife, exclaimed. Not long now, is it? A few more weeks, Eleanor confirmed, accepting the woman's good wishes. As Samuel finished their purchases and loaded them into the wagon, Eleanor noticed a commotion near the train station. A woman had just descended from the newly arrived train, looking lost and overwhelmed amidst the bustle of the platform. Samuel, Eleanor said quietly, nodding toward the station. Doesn't that remind you of something? Samuel followed her gaze, his expression softening as he recognized the situation, a young woman alone, clearly out of her element, clutching a small bag as if it contained everything she owned. Want me to see if she needs help? He asked. Eleanor shook her head, smiling. No, let me. I know exactly how she feels. With Thomas's hand firmly in hers, Eleanor crossed to the station. The young woman looked up as they approached, relief evident in her tired face at the sight of a respectable-looking mother and child. Excuse me, Eleanor said warmly. You look like you might be new to Piotr. I'm Eleanor Garrett. This is my son, Thomas. Are you meeting someone? The woman hesitated, then nodded. I'm supposed to be. A Mr. Jenkins. He advertised for a school teacher and we corresponded. She trailed off uncertainly. The school board chairman, Eleanor confirmed. He's probably just running late. Piotr operates on its own time sometimes. She gestured toward the general store. Why don't you wait with us? My husband and I would be happy to help you get settled. The young woman's shoulders relaxed slightly. That's very kind. I'm Margaret Wilson from Chicago. As they walked back to where Samuel waited with the wagon, Eleanor felt a profound sense of completion. 3 years ago, she had stood where Miss Wilson now stood alone, uncertain, her future hanging by the slimmest thread. Now she walked confident and loved, with her son's hand in hers, her husband waiting patiently, and their second child growing beneath her heart. Sweetwater Ranch had become exactly what Samuel had once promised. It could be a home, a sanctuary, a place where an abandoned woman and her child had found not just shelter but love. Everything all right? Samuel asked as they approached. Eleanor smiled up at him, the man who had once promised to raise a stranger's child and had become the center of their family's world. Everything is perfect, she replied, and meant it with all her heart.